Okay, why don't we get started with introductions and that people continue to join us, I'm sure, as we proceed. So welcome everyone to part two of our two-part webinar. This is running a new CL fellowship program. And we were excited to see a great turnout for our first part. And so I'm sure more people will filter in for this part as well. I thought we as the presenters will introduce ourselves, and then we'll get started with our presentations, and then we should have plenty of time. That's the plan anyway, to have time for discussion and Q&A at the end, because we really want this to be, for all of you joining us today, as helpful as possible for you. So I'm Q Lee, and I am the chair of the Fellowship Education Subcommittee. I am a psychiatrist and psychiatrist based in San Francisco VA Medical Center, and also the fellowship director, the CL Psychiatry Fellowship Director at UCSF. And then I will coordinate over to Durga.
Durga Roy. I am at Johns Hopkins. I am the vice chair of the Fellowship Education Subcommittee and have been on the committee since 2018. I'm also the CL Fellowship Director there. Thanks for joining.
I can go next. I'm Sejal Shah. I am the CL Division Director at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston and the former fellowship director there, and one of the associate vice chairs of the Department of Psychiatry at Brigham, and a member of the Fellowship Education Subcommittee. I will turn it over to Carrie.
Hi everyone, I'm Carrie Ernst. I'm the CL Fellowship Director at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York and chair of the Mentorship Subcommittee. Turn it over to Brant.
Hey everybody, Brant Hager from UNM, University of New Mexico, the Fellowship Director at University of New Mexico and a member of the Fellowship Education Subcommittee.
Great, thanks everyone. So for our agenda today is we're going to start off with each of us going to talk about for about 5 minutes or so about different policy or different topics related to starting and running a new CL fellowship program. We're going to start with Durga, who's going to talk about developing the policies that are required by ACGME. That's a holdover from our last webinar because we ran out of time. Sejal's then going to talk about recruitment strategies so that you can successfully recruit fellows to your new program. I'm going to talk about assessment and feedback. And then Carrie is going to go next and talk about how to staff your clinical competency and program evaluation committees and how to use the data from those committees to provide feedback to your fellows. And then Brant will bring up the rear and end things off in terms of the presentations by talking about wellness and developing a wellness toolkit and resources for that. So with that, I will turn, and if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat, or again, we'll have time for us to have a robust discussion, I'm sure, at the end. Okay, Durga, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. All right, let me just share my screen here. Is everybody able to see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to start off the conversation today talking about developing required policies. This is a topic near and dear to me because anytime we're starting a fellowship, we always want to kind of start from the beginning and think about what are the requirements and what's needed in terms of guidelines. And so the first thing is kind of thinking about accreditation, right? So every program under the ACGME has to go through an accreditation process. And as simplistic as this sounds, it's important to think about what does accreditation involve. So the first part about it is that it's a voluntary process of review. So there is a governing body that's overseeing fellowship programs and reviewing them from time to time periodically. It's a non-governmental agency of peers. And really the purpose is to evaluate programs, help program directors improve the content of the programs and how they are delivered, and then also publicly recognize programs within the GME. And the main thing is, it can sound stressful, it can sound intimidating, the word accreditation, whether you lose accreditation or not, but really it's to ensure compliance and making sure that you're meeting sort of the standard of educational delivery and quality across programs. So once you have a program, you become accredited, then there's this thing called continued accreditation. So the ACGME continues to evaluate during certain review cycles of whether a program should continue to maintain that accreditation status. And again, this is really at large to benefit the public because we're really protecting our trainees and the interests of our trainees. Specifically here, it would be residents and in our case, fellows for fellowships. And when you're looking at a continued accreditation process, these things that are getting evaluated are the quality of teaching, what's the learning approach, sort of kind of what's the pedagogy of the curriculum that's being delivered, the research, and sort of the professional practice that's being delivered and being taught to our trainees. And typically with the ACGME, reviews for continued accreditation occur every 2 to 5 years. So you will hear the ACGME kind of sending out announcements that your program is under review, and we'll do a site visit. We'll kind of look at all of the things to check off all the boxes, and it happens every 2 to 5 years. Now, the most important thing I can say about this is, as a program director, it's really ideal and critical, I would say, for a program and a program director to be constantly aware of what the ACGME guidelines are, because they may change. And so within a structure that you have that's documented, but be it a manual, be it sort of a guidebook, it's really important to keep updating that and making sure you know what the ACGME is saying about specific fellowship guidelines. So then we move to talking about common program requirements. So this is something that's also established from the ACGME, and it's essentially kind of a 4-part process. So it's a basic set of standards that are required for trainees. It's really focusing on developing the types of skills, specifically clinical skills, and the knowledge, as well as the attitudes and how it's implemented in patient care. So if you think of competencies in residency, this is kind of where this is born. Then the third part is to kind of facilitate an environment where there is an observable interaction between the fellows as well as and the patients under the direct guidance of a senior person, be it a faculty member, a clinical attending that's on the service. And then the program directors and the program administrators should be constantly kind of reviewing the website, as I mentioned before, periodically. And you'll hear about this a little bit later, but very importantly, documenting how you are reviewing this, and then also meeting in sort of official convenings throughout the year. So when we talk about the requirements of a program and of a fellowship program, you can kind of break them up into 3 subtypes: the core requirements, the detailed requirements, and then the outcome requirements. The core requirements are really sort of what is this at the basis of a curriculum that you've developed. What is this? It really defines the structure, what you're providing in terms of resources educationally, and then the process of how you're delivering both feedback, evaluation, goals and objectives, and all of the things that kind of comprise the curriculum. The detailed requirements kind of describe the specifics of it. So exactly how are you delivering the structure? What are the resources? What's the process? And then the outcome is really the program evaluation part. So as we've talked about in the first part, whenever you're thinking about a mission or you're thinking about goals and objectives, they should always be measurable. They should be time-bound. They should be specific. So this is when you're thinking about requirements and what the outcomes are going to be. That's how you're kind of thinking about them. Now, the components of program compliance, there are various things. So if you go to the ACGME website, you'll kind of see all the things that you'll need to submit. So the ACGME is going to every year come out with an announcement saying that you have to update your program. It's called the Accreditation Data System. And what you're doing is you're kind of taking all the elements of your program, your fellows, your faculty, the scholarship being produced, all these things, and you're being evaluated to make sure everything is up to date. The program information form, this is basically what we call like a block form that describes what the sites are within your program, what the rotational experiences are, who the faculty are. There's a competency-based training manual, which is very highly recommended that you as program directors have, that people can go back to and refer. The survey is what comes out that you have to answer all these questions to and say that you're checking off all these boxes. You're going to hear more about this later, but there's the program evaluation committee, which is where you're meeting with all the faculty and fellows. So fellows really should be on the PEC, who really, at least at minimum twice a year, evaluate how the program is going. Are there any pitfalls? Are there any barriers, any challenges? What's going well, what's not going well? Then there's the clinical competency committee, which really looks specifically at the performance of the trainee. And then you're looking at key faculty who are board certified, who are producing scholarship and making sure they're dedicating a minimum average of hours in supervision. And then the final thing is the milestones. You'll hear about this as well, I think, later on. These are where we're actually twice a year officially evaluating our fellows and making sure they meet certain anchors that can then be compared to national metrics. So these are sort of the bits and pieces that go into the big bucket that's considered to be program compliance. And the ACGME very heavily monitors this, and you really can rely on your GME office at your institution to really help you sort of pinpoint what needs guidance and what doesn't. And this is just kind of an example of the PIF, which is sort of the program evaluation form. So this is just kind of a block schedule of what a rotational experience might look like. So when you think about sort of when you're starting off a program, I think the most important thing that I could probably convey today is your institutional GME office is your friend. They are going to be the ones that are really up to date on all the things that is required from the ACGME. And it's sort of this bi-directional relationship. They are directly connected with the ACGME in terms of communications because you have a DIO at your institution who's going to be the person that's going to sign off on a lot of the things for your program. But really, it's sort of this kind of hierarchical structure where you can report to your institutional GME, and then the GME reports to the ACGME. But most importantly, that your institutional GME are the core resource that you have as a program director to really get guidance on the policies that are out there. And just for convenience, I've put the site up there. So the ACGME website has all of the information you need. You have to click specifically on the CL Fellowship, and it'll give you all the up-to-date things that you have on program compliance and the goals and objectives. And with that, I will popcorn it now. I'm actually going to use the word popcorn to Sejal.
Thanks so much, Durga. Share my slides. All right. All right, so I'm going to be talking just a little bit about recruitment strategies. This is just one person's view on things. I'm very much looking forward to kind of our discussion, and if people have questions about this or have things to add from their own program about recruitment strategies. I think of this, I love talking about recruitment because I think, we're in such a privileged position as, somebody that is a program director or interviews for a CL fellowship program or is thinking about starting a CL fellowship program. We are truly kind of bringing in the future of CL psychiatry into our beloved field. And I know that sounds, trite and probably a little corny, but I do think, we have so much passion for our field that it is so wonderful to meet kind of the younger generation of people that are interested in CL psychiatry. The other thing that I'll mention, though, that it's a buyer's market. So, recruitment is very important in our field. This is not true all across medicine. There are certain specialties and subspecialties that really don't think of themselves as a buyer's market because it is so much more competitive. We are getting more and more competitive, and I'll show some numbers in just a little bit, but we are still a buyer's market, which is great for the applicants. And I see that as a complete positive, but also really another reason why it's really important to think about recruitment. So recruitment starts well before the interview season. We'll talk about why that is in just a couple slides. But it is not just when interviews start that you start thinking about how am I going to fill my slot or slots within my program. One of the things to think about is your program website. So last time in part one, Carrie Ernst talked about program aims and your mission statement. That is something that is incredibly important and that should be on your website front and center, and really will give applicants a good idea of what is this program about and what am I getting myself into if I apply to this program and or interview at this program. So thinking about some data, so this is available on the NRMP website, and it looks a little busy, but what it really shows is that, the number of programs has kind of slowly, steadily been rising in our field. The number of positions has slowly, steadily been rising, and the number of applicants, most importantly, has been rising. And particularly if you want to look at the last line, between 2023 and 2024, we went from 87 applicants to 103. So we're doing something right in our field, where more and more people are going into CL, which is fantastic. Here's just a little bit more drilled down version, also available on the NRMP website, where during 2024, so the last match, we had 68 enrolled programs. And what I'll draw your attention to is the highlighted in gray portions, which programs filled were 40, which is great, but that shows that only 60% of programs filled and about 75% of positions filled. So again, really important to think about recruitment. The next thing I'll talk about is marketing your program. So when you think about recruitment, I really want you to think about this as you are marketing your fellowship program. So you want to make sure that the information that's available online, which is where people are going to turn to for information about your program, that's accurate. So an example of this is the ACLP website has all programs that are available in the match. They are all available on the ACLP website with detailed information, including, if you want to, a link to your own program's website. So keeping that website info updated with things like salary, whether you accept the ERAS application and or the common application, whether you accept visas like H1 or J1, all of that is obviously important to applicants. And so that's perhaps the first place that they're going to look. Your own program website, really important to keep updated, as well as asking your department to keep their website updated. Applicants want to know about what is this larger department that I would potentially be a part of. For your program website, you want detailed information, perhaps even a video. Applicants should really be able to imagine themselves at your program. Many of them in this day and age, when we're doing virtual interviews, may not actually get a chance to visit your program either during interview season or even before they match, or maybe even after they match. And so having as much information on your program website as possible is really important. Making sure that you are connected to any residency programs that are either part of your department itself or local area programs. That's often a big source of applicants for your own program. And so making sure that you're visible, your faculty are visible in those residency programs. A way to do that is local organizations like state psychiatric societies, making sure that your faculty are involved. If there's a CL committee or a subcommittee or CL work that's being done at your local psychiatric society, get involved in that. There are lots of residents that get involved in those state psychiatric societies. And so a great way to kind of show visibility. And then engage alumni. Keep them updated about your program. If you see them at ACLP, or if you have a listserv of your alumni, making sure that they are just aware that you are continuing to recruit into this program that they graduated from. They are your ambassadors. And so making sure that they are playing a role in recruitment. So interviews and interview season. So faculty interviewers, pick faculty that are enthusiastic, and pick the people that the fellows would have interaction with, the people that might actually supervise and mentor them. That's who applicants want to meet. And then highlight what sets your program apart from other programs. Every single program out there across the US is a fantastic CL program. Some just emphasize certain things over others. And so highlight that during the interviews. Let them know if you focus on collaborative care or critical care psychiatry, et cetera, et cetera. Be transparent. Talk about, what are the things that you offer. Applicants will be able to determine whether that program is a good fit for them or not. But try to be as transparent as possible. You want it to be a good fit. You don't want somebody to come to your program and be unhappy because they thought that there was something available and it wasn't. highlight local area activities, things that are fun to do in the area. Again, allowing the applicant to really feel like, oh, I could actually live there, especially if they're coming from out of town or if they've never visited the area that your program is in. And then give them access to current fellows. For our interviews, that's actually our longest, that's not really an interview, but it's a time for them to touch base with our fellows. That time period is actually double the time that they spend with our faculty interviewers. And so allow them to meet with your current fellows and ask questions and get a sense of what it's like to be a fellow in the program. And then have the fellowship coordinator kind of easily accessible throughout interview season. Explain to your coordinator how important this is and what a buyer's market it is. And it truly is so essential for the coordinator to be available, even more so than us, to make sure that they are answering questions that may come up for the applicants. That person, the fellowship coordinator, is probably the person that the applicants are going to have the most contact with via email throughout interview season. One of the other things that you can highlight during interviews is, feedback that fellows give. How do you obtain feedback, and is that used to actually improve the program? That is something that applicants definitely want to hear about. A pitfall that I think people often get into when they're then creating their rank list is, trying to determine, is the applicant going to like our program? Are they going to fit in? Let the applicant decide that. You have been transparent about your program. Rank people based upon how you feel they fit into your rank list, and then the match actually determines, it definitely favors the applicant, as it should, and will determine whether that applicant matches with you. And then just some last considerations. So I talked a little bit about fellow feedback. So we do exit interviews with our fellows and utilize that to determine what changes need to be made to the program. Again, highlighting that with applicants is really helpful. Thinking about networking. So this kind of goes along with the third thing that's there, which is, once a program director, always a program director. You're going to have this program director mindset. You're going to be wearing a program director hat. When you meet medical students at ACLP, you're going to be talking about, well, there are fellowships out there for CL, and, be great if you're thinking about it. Connect them with other people, other colleagues that you know across the country. And ultimately, hype CL. Get medical students and residents excited about CL. Even if they don't come to your own program, a rising tide lifts all boats. It will be beneficial for our field if we kind of increase the number of applicants. So I will stop there and turn it over to, I believe, Q.
Great, thank you, Sejal. So I'm going to talk about assessment and feedback. And let me start my slideshow. Okay. So I'll start off with the ACGME requirements for assessing fellows. There are things that the fellowship programs need to do and program directors need to do. Then we'll talk about likewise for the assessment of faculty, and then I'll have some examples of forms. Getting back to the ACGME requirements, all programs must provide an objective performance evaluation based on the competencies and milestones. You need to use multiple evaluators, so you can't just have faculty alone doing the evaluation. So some examples of this might be peers or patients, other staff members, and then programs must provide this information to the Clinical Competency Committee, or the CCC, to help assess fellow progress and improvement toward unsupervised practice. If you're a program director, you or your designee with input from the CCC must meet with and review semi-annual evaluation of performance. So at the midpoint of the year, including progress along the milestones. You need to assist fellows in developing individualized learning plans. If any of you don't know what that is, just mention that in the chat and we'll go over that in a little detail. And then hopefully this is rare, but if you need to develop plans for families who are failing to progress in conjunction with your GME office. In terms of the final evaluation, you must provide one, and you must verify that the fellow has demonstrated the knowledge, skills, and behaviors necessary to enter unsupervised practice, and you need to share this with the fellow upon the completion of the program. in terms of assessing faculty, programs must have a process to evaluate each faculty member's performance at least annually. These assessments must include written and confidential feedback from the fellows. And the confidential piece is really important. And because in addition, feedback must be provided to faculty at least annually. And this feedback is required by the ACGME to be anonymized. So the minimum number of evaluations you need to have to provide aggregate feedback is 4. So that's what the ACGME does too. If you have less than 4 fellows, then the ACGME will not let you see the fellow survey results until you've aggregated 4, and then they'll provide that to you. So I do the same thing with my faculty. If they're new faculty, I don't provide them with feedback until they've been evaluated by 4 fellows. So that's just important to keep in mind. I'll just go over quickly some examples of forms. I do not recommend using the evaluation form at the top of this slide, but there are resources, largely thanks to Paul Desan at Yale, at this link. It includes an overall fellowship assessment form, an observed interview assessment form, observing a fellow doing an interview, and a 360 fellowship assessment form. Now, the fellowship assessment form on the website is several years old, and my understanding is that since milestones were developed, the ACGME and accordingly GME offices require that the assessment form maps to some extent, at least to some extent, to milestones and competencies. So this example that Flan Meredith at UMass Chan Medical School, Bay State, shared with us. So you can see that now what they don't want is you're like taking all 20 odd milestones and having every faculty member, do the milestones themselves. But what she did is she, grouped these are the competencies and milestones, and she chose certain milestones within these competencies, and then asks the faculty members to choose A through F in these examples. And then she has an area at the bottom for areas of strength and areas of growth. This is the example of the observed interview assessment form that's on the website. This is our ILP form, or individualized learning plan form, which asks the fellow to think about their learning goals at the beginning, the end, middle, and the end of the block, whatever you decide that might want that time frame to be, or it could be during a rotation as well. This is our year-end evaluation form, so I just check off that the fellow is achieving competencies expected for their training, that they're sufficient to enter practice without direct supervision, that there have been no ethical or moral misconduct or a serious question of their clinical competence, and that they are proficient in these areas, which I just lifted out of the ACGME CL Psychiatry Fellowship Program requirements. And then I sign off on this. I also, in this form, actually add a verification letter that says that they successfully completed the program, because we as program directors, if you're new, you will be asked sometimes by fellows or institutions to verify that your graduate fellow did complete your program successfully. So I just give the fellow a form that they could actually just show whenever they're, apply for a new job and so on, then I don't need to worry about it. So that's my presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to Carrie.
Thank you, Q. I'm just going to share my slides. Let me know, can you guys see that? Can you see it okay? Yes?
Yes.
You can hear me okay? Okay. So I'm going to talk about some of what was alluded to in the past earlier today, the CCC milestones and PEC, so some more ACGME requirements. So just very, very briefly, and I'll provide these slides we can put on the website. If you think about the annual GME cycle, what you have to do as program directors over the course of the year, just want to draw your attention to two things. One, the milestone reporting and the clinical competency committee meetings, and those usually happen twice a year. The milestones are reported in early January and in June. So as we'll talk about, the CCC meets right before that. And then the PEC, the Program Evaluation Committee, usually meets in May or June. So there are many other things you keep in mind in the annual life cycle, but those are the things we're going to highlight today. A little bit of background to the milestones in CCC, that in the past, there were a number of different approaches to try to monitor educational milestones and provide feedback how fellows were doing, but none of them were particularly successful. So the idea of developing these milestones, which were implemented by the ACGME in 2013, was really to provide very explicit definitions of what we expect our residents or our fellows to do or to have in terms of knowledge, behaviors, attributes, and performance. And the milestones are defined by input from a number of different organizations, the ACGME, but also representation from the specialty organizations, the ABMS, program directors, residents, and fellows. And these milestones, these are, as I'll show you, these are narrative descriptions of different kind of performance levels for our trainees and allowing them to demonstrate different skills, knowledge, and behaviors. They're grouped around the 6 core clinical competency domains, and they're really developed in terms of steps, moving from novice to expert or master. So really describe a trajectory of progress where we would like to see our trainees going. They also set aspirational goals of excellence. So that's important to keep in mind as well, that people might not meet all of them. You're all familiar with the 6 core competencies. And it's important to also know what the milestones are not. So they are not the only piece of information or the only means of assessment of your trainees. At the end of the year, it really is always up to the program director to decide whether a trainee has shown the knowledge, skills, behaviors, and attitudes that they need to enter unsupervised practice in the subspecialty. But milestones are one piece of data only. But when you look at milestones on the ACGME website, they often look like this. Many of you have probably seen them before, either as trainees or for residents. But the fellowships have similar sort of things. They're organized from level 1 to level 5. Level 1 really is supposed to be the level at which the trainee is entering the program. And with level 5 really being aspirational and level 4 in theory being the graduation target. But it's of course important to know that some trainees enter at certain milestones at very advanced levels, and others really struggle to even meet, in theory, the graduation requirements. So they're not set in stone. And that's why ultimately the ACGME repeatedly says that it's up to the program director to decide whether a fellow has met the criteria you have set out for your program in order to graduate. This is just one piece of information that can be helpful. When you look at the milestones, there are some terms to know about. So they're organized by these core competencies, and then they have these sub-competencies. So these topics within the core competencies. This is just one example for patient care. This is history taking. And then within it, you'll see level 1 through 5, the different milestones, so where a trainee could be in terms of the set of progression. Level 1, very basic, acquiring a general medical history, to level 5, really gathering and synthesizing information in a sophisticated and efficient manner. There's one other term to know about: threads, sometimes within milestones. The competencies, the sub-competencies, there'll be 2 different areas. So within teaching, this is one example where there's development as a teacher and observable teaching skills. So you'll see 2 different sets of these threads that run through, and you'll have to sort of pick in general where the trainee falls. I'm looking at both of them together, and you can pick any level. You also can pick right in between the 2 levels, and you're going to do this reporting process twice a year via the ACGME website. When you become a program director, you will get login information, and you will get reminders from the ACG to log in and do this. Now, the milestones are important to share with your faculty and trainees at the beginning. I give them to our fellows at the start of fellowship because they need to know, what are the targets? How are we assessing them? But it's also important to know that this can be, to reassure the trainees that this is not the only means by which we're assessing them. It's just a guide, and they're really helpful information for them to organize their learning plans. The trainees, it's helpful to have them use them for self-assessment and to create their learning plans. And as the CCC, as we'll discuss, will use the milestones to reach consensus about each trainee's performance. The milestones are not for use by external entities. So if your trainee is applying for a job and the future employer says, "Can you send me the milestones?" you should say, "No, I'm sorry, like that, I'm not allowed to do that. That's not the purpose for which they are used." Now, the Clinical Competency Committee meets and actually makes recommendations to the program director about how to assess the trainees along each of these milestones. It must meet at least twice per year, and the reporting is done twice per year. And the ACGMA, this is the language in the program requirements, it has to include at least 3 members, at least one of whom is core faculty. And it has to review all of the different evaluations from the different data sources at least twice a year, see where the fellows fall on the specialty specific milestones, and then advise the program director. The CCC is also very helpful in identifying struggling trainees early on if people are not where you would hope they would be, and identifying advanced trainees too, trainees who are further along than you would expect, who might need enrichment or other electives or other activities. The CCC, the program director often is on the CCC, but doesn't have to and is not supposed to be the chair. Somebody else is supposed to be the chair. You cannot generally have trainees on your CCC with the exception of chief residents. If you're running a residency program, your program coordinator can take part, other faculty. The program director does get to decide though how many people are on it, who's on it, what the structure is, what kind of preparation has to be done, when the meeting is going to happen. And it's important to think about, this is where the assessment talk kind of comes in, is to think about all the different data sources you have that you want your committee members to look at before reviewing. Now, fellowships are a little bit easier than residency because it's a very small number of fellows. So likely all of your faculty know your fellows very, very well. But you still want to think about different data sources, not just the evaluations of your fellows, but other things, perhaps their self-evaluations, perhaps their scholarship or their presentation or their teaching. Some programs do 360 evaluations where you might have information from nurses or other ancillary personnel. Some might do sim labs or OSCEs or some kind of standard evaluations. All of these things that you mentioned, all of these may be data sources that you can use, that your clinical competency committee can use in order to figure out where a fellow would fall in the milestones. And then the other committee that you're required by the ACGME to organize in terms of members and to have meet is the PEC, the Program Evaluation Committee. This is appointed by the program director. The point really is to meet at least once a year to really discuss and then document what the annual program evaluation will be. And this is a very important part of the continuous improvement process for all programs. You have to have at least 2 faculty members on it and at least 1 fellow. So I often invite all of my fellows, and the program evaluation committee will review the website, we'll review the mission, which we talked about last time, we'll review the goals, how the program is progressing, we'll review evaluation data, what's going well, what's not going well. It conducts a SWOT analysis, strengths, challenges, opportunities, and threats, and then ultimately comes up with an action plan, looks at the action plan from the past year, which you have to submit as part of your annual program evaluation to the ACGME. How are we doing on the action plan? We've said we were going to fix this and that. Are we doing well? Do we need to adjust? Do we need to pivot? And then revises the action plan and everyone reviews it. So, again, the PEC meets once a year, some meet multiple times a year if there are more issues to discuss. If that's not enough time, you want to give committee members and as much information as possible in advance of the meeting and really work together on generating an updated action plan. So that's all I wanted to share. I know so some of that information is not as exciting as some of the other information, but it is important. These are the things that the ACGME requires. Usually your GME office will also be asking you about this and to tell them who's on your CC, who's on your PEC. So definitely something you want to do and can be very, very helpful because can generate data that not only will help your trainees, will help guide your conversations with your trainees if they're struggling and need help with the milestones, but also will really help generate a lot of information, I think, that can help with your program, revising your mission, revising your goals, removing a rotation, designing a new educational experience, and really having input from a lot of people about that. So with that, I will stop and I will send it to Brent, I think.
No. Buddy, we're going to talk a little bit about building a wellness toolkit. Slides up.
Yes,
Great.
look great.
Great. So the purpose of the wellness program requirement is to try to inspire joy of work through stress management, self-care, nurturance, mutual responsibility for wellness, and cultivating a positive culture, and then modeling attitudes and behaviors that lead to wellness. The specific components that are laid out in the common program requirements for CL include ensuring a healthy workload for fellows, ensuring a safe workplace. It speaks about it from the physical safety standpoint, but also emotional safety is implied. Developing wellness policies and procedures, recognizing, providing self-screening tools and treatment access for burnout, depression, substance use disorders, suicide, and potential violence. The treatment and access needs to be 24/7. It doesn't necessarily have to be through your institution. It can be done telemedicine. The program needs to have protected leave, protected implying that a person can take leave without fear of retaliatory evaluation, and also that clinical efforts are protected for that fellow. So the fellow can leave without their clinical caseload being left in the lurch. And then lastly, there's the requirement for recognition and mitigation of fatigue, which can include transportation of fatigued fellows. So how do you build a wellness toolkit? Well, you have to build it as a community, and you have to build it by example. This is not something that can be done theoretically and not something that can be done just with a program director. It needs to occur and tap into multiple different levels. So how do you encourage wellness in the patient-fellow interaction, in the fellow-fellow interaction, in the fellow staff interaction, the fellow faculty interaction, and so on? It needs to take place in multiple contexts. So discussion about wellness in clinical supervision, also discussions about wellness in didactic content, as well as mentorship. The National Academy of Medicine put together this systems-based approach or systems model of clinician burnout and professional well-being, where they highlighted how most of what is at play has to do with external environment, the healthcare organization, and the care delivery system, and that we're not able to ensure wellness unless we are tapping into those systems and ensuring that those systems are supportive of wellness. This gets mediated through individual factors to either produce burnout or professional well-being. There's consequences, and then you can learn and improve. What this model leaves out is the importance of relationships. So relationships at all those different levels that we just talked about. How not to build a wellness toolkit. It doesn't work to build a wellness toolkit in isolation. It doesn't work to build a wellness toolkit by counterexample. So for example, if your faculty are unwell, it's going to be difficult for them to model behaviors of wellness for your fellows who are trying to learn these things. How not to build a wellness toolkit by increasing fellow burden, for example, more required trainings without time to accomplish them. Through cosmesis, I'm sure many of us have seen institutions where there's like a resident appreciation day that kind of falls flat because the institution doesn't really support residents or fellows or medical students or what have you. And then without system support, this needs to be supported at multiple levels of the system. So building a wellness toolkit, you start off with examining supports and threats to wellness at all the different levels that we talked about, and then develop and implement a strategic plan to enhance supports, to address threats, and then continue to your PDSA cycles to continuously update. And how this plays out is going to be different for each institution. One institution may have trouble with a departmental level. Another institution may have trouble at an institutional funding level. There might be a staff fellow interaction difficulty. So it's really going to play out specifically to your institution. And I'll stop there and pass it back to Hugh. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thanks to all of our presenters here. Really appreciate the information, the wealth of information, expertise that you all have. And so I'd like to open it up to the group. We have about 15 minutes for Q&A or to topic about any topic related to running a new fellowship program or starting one. If you're thinking of starting one, happy to entertain any questions now. I think that some of the things that I would add to what's been presented is that there are also policies ACGME requires, such as moonlighting policy, leave policy. Like there couple, at least a dozen, and probably more, but your GME office, I mean, I found it very helpful to just go to my psychiatry residency training program director and just ask them for their policies, and I just changed the wording for fellowship essentially. So that's one thing I would add. Anything else from our panel that you'd like to add? Right, so Gitel is having technical issues, but these slides, this presentation will be posted on the ACLP website. I'd wait till after the meeting. Staff are pretty busy, but they will be posted eventually. Yes,
Go ahead,
Natasha.
Natasha.
Hi, I just want to say thank you to everyone. This has been so helpful, just as the first part. I wanted to ask more about the teaching and supervision aspect. How do you encourage your faculty, especially since faculty vary by level? They're senior faculty, kind of like mid-level. How do you continue encouraging your faculty to provide kind of supervision and teaching, kind of show them appreciation to maintain the quality of supervision on your service and in your fellowship?
I think it's a great question, Natasha. And I think, my fellowship is relatively small. So, I don't know. So we have, we have, when you take into account the electives, and both inpatient and outpatient, we have probably about a dozen people supervising each fellow over the course of the year. And most of them I consider to be core faculty, so they're part of the clinical competency committee. So just by nature of that, they recognize the importance of really of ensuring that the fellows are getting the supervision they need. So I think that helps. I think that and this was an idea I took from, I can't recall who, but I started last year because I only had one fellow previously, but now I have two fellows. And we expanded the number of faculty because we expanded from the VA to the UCSF. So now we have two sites where fellows spend 6 months each. I started a teaching award that the fellows voted on. And just to show appreciation, and it doesn't come attached with money or anything, but people like appreciate being appreciated. So that's another kind of concrete thing and I can't recall because I thought it was a great idea to do that. So that's something else I've done to acknowledge the people who maybe might shine. They all shine, but maybe shine a little bit more in working with our fellows. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I also started a teaching and a mentorship award that's given out at graduation, which I think has been really helpful to recognize just all that my faculty do in my division. The other thing I'll add is, one of the things that really drives the faculty to, give back is that our CL fellowship ends up being a huge area of recruitment for our faculty. And so it's like, oh, wow, like if we, put a lot of effort into our fellows, we're going to have great colleagues as our colleagues as faculty. And so that's helpful. I also really, when I was fellowship director, really stressed that our fellows are junior faculty. And so I would invite them to our faculty staff meetings and really treat them as junior attendings. And I think that is also helpful in terms of really engaging the remainder of my actual faculty and in providing supervision. And then doing, things like social events and things like that, I think are really helpful. It's, it's again, not it doesn't give them any extra salary or, but I think people do appreciate that kind of sense of camaraderie and community.
I would also say I haven't found that our faculty haven't wanted to teach. I think they're very enthusiastic about teaching. The issues that have come up have been struggling around how to remediate fellows, how to give feedback to fellows. Like there's challenges, especially with the junior faculty as they're transitioning to the role of new faculty. So, we have like staff meeting every other week as a CL team. And, really we set aside time for, the staff meeting usually to talk about any issues pertaining to trainees. And it does become a time for sort of mini role modeling or mini supervision, not necessarily me to others, but just peer-based supervision. Here someone will say, here, I'm having not really sure how to handle this with a fellow. And then, another person might say, here's what I would suggest. And that has really been helpful too. It's not for want of because they don't like to teach or lack of trying. I think it is, people feel overwhelmed. They don't know where to start, especially if, we have young faculty who are intimidated. Some fellows are intimidating. Some, they just by their attitude or their behavior, or they're challenging in different ways, or they're maybe more experienced than our younger faculty in some other venues. So, I think really having a space for that kind of faculty development, that regular faculty development should happen and will help.
Just piggybacking on that concept of recruitment, even at the level of fellow recruitment, I think when you have faculty who are in the role of teaching, they're attending clinically supervising your fellows, but they're also actively involved in recruitment into your fellowship. I think that's also very reinforcing, because then they get to see the broad spectrum of potential applicants that you can get, and then how that could mold and sort of target their own teaching styles and what kind of concepts and content they may want to change their curriculum on or deliver to. So I think having the same faculty that are teaching also being part of recruitment also, sort of enhances that engagement in teaching in general.
Other
You
questions?
have to advocate to protect their time to teach too. I mean, that's the other piece. Everyone's busy. It's not compensated usually to teach, and they're not being paid even to recruit applicants. They're not being paid like I am as the fellowship director. So, I think you also have to find ways. I mean, it's not up to me whether they get compensated, but to advocate to my director and her director about all of that the faculty are doing and how really important it is. Anytime the RVU conversation comes up, I always, we're compared to other sites in our system, we'll remind them that, actually when you have to supervise fellows and residents, it actually takes a lot more time for each case than if you're, a solo psychiatrist and just seeing your own patient. So, I think there are places fellowship directors can have voices to advocate in that way.
Other questions?
Yeah, folks, I just wanted to highlight along the wellness area that the ACGME does have an entire site and set of links that are dedicated to wellness resources, both from a systems level and from a recruitment level and from a didactic level as well. And that's in the slides.
Thanks, Brant. I think one thing I really want to encourage all of you to think about, and anyone who's watching this after we finish today, I think that, and I'll just say this wearing my hat as a member of the DEI subcommittee and the chair of the DEI task force that put together some recommendations for ACLP several years ago. The ACGME does not have a lot of specific DEI requirements, actually. I mean, surprisingly few. I think they're behind the times in that respect. I mean, we've just recently added things like the word diverse in terms of a workforce and in terms of populations, and the language, some of it is outdated. But I really want to encourage you, despite that, to really think about incorporating DEI into your curricula. I'll just make a plug for that. There are resources on the ACLP website to help you do that. But it wasn't part of this presentation because EDGME doesn't really require it. And so, but I just wanted to make a shout out about that. So since you know, we don't have a lot of questions, but yeah, so.
Thanks, Q. And that resource page that I talked about with the wellness resources, they do have a bunch of resources about the intersection between DEI and wellness.
Fantastic. Anything else?
I had a question about ranking applicants at the end of the cycle. So with applicants, it being a buyer's market, they're always encouraged kind of rank, you know, based on your own preference, which programs you like to go to. With programs, when they're ranking applicants, you know, do you guys ever consider like the likelihood that an applicant might actually go to your program? How do you take that consideration?
I think it's a great question. And I'll say that, you know, for like our residency training program, psychiatry, the adult, general adult, they do take that into account. But I think that it's largely because they have so many qualified candidates that, you know, and some people are just very close. So might as well rank more highly the people. And then you have the option of also telling them that they have been ranked high enough to match, right? Or, you know, we have 16, or you're ranked like 99% chance that you'll match, you know, based on where they've been ranked. And if they're likely to come, then the program director doesn't have to worry, right, about, you know. And so I don't take that into account for my program, and other people may do this differently just because the numbers are much lower. And so, I don't care what, say, like we had to go to number 16 to get 2 people, you know, that's fine with me. It's like, I don't take that into account. Because, because, you know, we don't interview that many people and we have only 2 spots. So I figure I might just rank in the way that, you know, we feel, you know, makes sense in terms of who we like holistically, who we, you know, like to have join our program. Thoughts from others?
I think it depends on if your GME office or your department chair cares about how far you have to go down to match. I have found for fellowship, they haven't really cared. I've sort of convinced them that just to fill is like a great accomplishment, and that's
exactly
the target. It shouldn't matter like where we have to go. But certainly for the residency program, I know they are judged. Like that is a question that the chair and the dean ask the program, like to what number did you have to go down to match your class? So I do think, you know, some program directors, that is on their minds. So they are sort of thinking about ranking people that are more likely to come there. But yeah, for me as well, I mean, I generally don't think about it so much, because also, like you said, it's a relatively small rank list. So, you know, it's sort of random even where people, you know, sometimes it's like, should this person be 7 or 8 or 9? But, you know, everyone is sort of, sometimes they're similar, and it's a small group anyway, and you'd sort of be happy with any of them. So, you know, I don't as much. Look, I'm sure unconsciously it comes up if someone has sent you like a love letter and, you know, I'm ranking you to match and you're my first choice and you like them too. You know, I'm sure unconsciously they end up, but we also talk about it as a group too. You know, I don't make that decision alone. You know, we talk about it as a whole like committee to see where people, you know, should be ranked.
Okay, well, we're at time. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today on a Sunday evening or late afternoon, wherever you may be. I want to thank our panel as well. This has been really fun. And I look forward to seeing you all in Miami. So thanks, everyone. And then Autumn, we can stop recording. And then Carrie, do you want to stay on for a little bit?
Sure.
Thanks, everyone.